Hjelm. I work as a product owner for SoapUI at a company called SmartBear. We provide developers and testers with testing tools. And SoapUI is a testing tool for APIs, especially designed for testing APIs. The name implies that it's only for SOAP, but of course we do REST testing also, as well as EMF and other stuff. So 10 minutes, it's a long time. In internet time, maybe. Okay, so this is not SoapUI, because what we've done is the last week we rebuilt SoapUI and created a platform of it. So we also have a platform, but it's a testing platform, and it's an API testing platform that should fulfill all the needs that developers and testers have for testing APIs and developing APIs. It's based on SoapUI, and for instance, the old SoapUI is still kind of visible here. But we have split out the functionality into different areas, so you can find load testing here, security testing here, and a new product, or a new tool, I should say, called Service Virtualization, or Service V. For those of you who have been using SoapUI, how many are testers here, by the way? Okay, so it's at least one person that have used SoapUI, maybe. It's the de facto tool for API testing in the API testers world. But Service V is it's a full virtualization tool for virtualizing APIs. There was a limited capability in SoapUI called mocking to virtualize APIs, but this Service V feature is something much more mature. What do I have to add? Yeah, if you happen to be a current SoapUI user, SoapUI Pro user, you should be aware that the license you have will you can use it directly to run SoapUI and Ready API and get all the functionality you're used to, but in a much more easy-to-use form. Okay, I'll first start by showing how you can easily create a REST project for testing a REST API. You can either create it from a WSDL definition to create a SOAP testing project. You can use WADL files, or you can use RAML files to quickly set up your definitions. But I'll just show it by, maybe you don't have one of those files, maybe just have a URI. So I've prepared a URI here. And the only thing you need to do is to paste that API, and in a very short time you have this API request defined, and you can immediately start calling it. And you get the response on the right side, and you can get it nicely formatted as JSON. But this is most common thing to test your APIs. Maybe just doing ad hoc calls like this. But of course, to do serious testing, you have to add these calls to a test suite and create sequences of calls. So here I created quickly a test case that has one call to this service. And I can still go in and use try to call that. But I can also here add assertions for testing the results. And because of the limited time, I will just use one assertion that checks for how long time it takes to respond. And as you can see, I try it again. The assertion I did was to check that I get an answer in 200 milliseconds. But today Google is slow, so I get it takes 432 milliseconds. And that actually gets me to another aspect. If Google or someone else doesn't allow you to do massive amounts of calls to test the API, you have to virtualize the API. And that's really easy to do. You go back to the API definition that you have here. and add this to a REST vert. We call them verts instead of mocks that we called them before. And so I create the vert first, and this gets you into service V immediately. And it's a new interface if you're used to working with mocks in SoapUI. You see some similarities, but this is a much easier way to see that when you get this request, you have a dispatcher that decides which response you're going to send back, and here is the response. And you can, as you can see, the response is pre-filled with the answer that I got before. And I can start this service V vert. Oh, it's already occupied. So it seems I forgot to stop another word that was running. So I can start it now. Yeah, and it's running. And now I can go back to my API. And instead of using googleapis.com, I use the vert that I created and got an answer. And now you see that the response time was actually 117 milliseconds, which means that if I go back to this test that I created, it should now be green, and it is not. Oh, it even took 5 seconds this time. Okay, so it's something wrong with my virtual server. Or it's the usual demo ghost that's always here when I'm doing demos. Okay, one last thing that I have to show is that you can now, as opposed to the old SoapUI mocks, it's really easy to change behavior. For instance, add latency to actually get very slow responses. You can say that after a number of seconds, you should start sending error codes back instead of the real thing, and so on. And this is something that you had to do with scripting before. And you can also see a transaction log of all the calls and responses you've done. And a very new cool feature is that you can add data sources to drive your verts, which means you can very quickly come up to speed with responding. Depending on incoming data, you can really get all the responses that you want, because when you want to simulate reality. And the last thing I'm going to show is that these verts I've just started on this machine, but you can also have a vert server, which I have running here. That could be running on a separate machine. And deploying a vert to the vert server is done easily by just dragging and dropping it and starting it. And the vert server, you probably need that if you're developing an API that you have a lot of consumers that want to test your API. So you have to set it up on a vert server. Or if you're in a bigger organization, also could have a lot of users, so you don't have to use your own machine. And I will be in the booth. I think there is a coffee break at 3. There is so much more I would like to show, but it's a little bit of limited time. I understand that, why. So I'll be at the booth, and let's see if I got everything covered. Yeah, that's about it. Okay, ready API.
Thank you, Matti.